Um, so the balance of forces in the Middle East, and it's important to term it that, because since around 2001 to 2003, there hasn't actually been a coherent order in the Middle East, a set of status
Right.
quo and revisionist powers. There's simply a balance of forces between each side. Has been fluid, but the actors have been relatively apparent. You
Hmm.
have two real central antagonisms that still exist: Israel versus Iran, and the Gulf Arabs, both individually and in concert, versus Iran. Those have ideological, power political bases. It's not those two bases very much intersect to create a robust and durable set of reasons for enmity that are baked into the respective regimes that we're talking about. That mean you're likely to have, and as we saw throughout the 2000s and 2010s, a Cold War situation persist. This story, however, really begins with the negotiation of the JCPOA by the United States in the 2010s.
Right.
What does that do? Openly, it reduces the odds of an immediate Iranian nuclear weapon. And it's very important. That phrasing is very important as well, because the JCPOA never actually removes or takes Iranian nuclear weapons capability off the table. It simply defers the issue until the 2030s, when the safeguards within the deal all come off. Why was that done? Well, we understand from what those who were involved in negotiating the deal said and wrote, even at the time, that the fundamental proposition of the US under the Obama administration was the route to peace in the Middle East runs through integrating Iran into the region
Right.
and forcing, to quote the former president, from memory, admittedly, the Saudis, the Iranians, and the Israelis to share the region between each other, i.e., to stop doing all this, frankly, I think from Washington's point of view, annoying, counterproductive, back and forth jockeying and rivalry, and simply get on with the business of trading with each other, making money, and being normal.
Right. A
That
little bit
bet
like what the Chinese proposing recently.
Yeah, so there's definitely a parallel there with the Saudi China question, which is definitely, it's worth understanding because that deal isn't going to be durable. But that bet essentially failed on the Obama administration's part. What instead the Iran deal did was dump a load of cash into the Iranian state, which was funneled rather directly to the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, the most effective implement of the state's offensive action. And that was dumped straight back into these massive proxy wars that Iran was waging at the time with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and to a lesser but still visible extent with Israel in Syria, sort of in Iraq, and also in Yemen. That situation goes on from 2014 till around 2020, 2021. Why is 2020, 2021 the break point? Because you have the coronavirus pandemic, which changes everyone's bargaining positions. In effect, it amplifies Saudi power because the Saudis and the Russians have a showdown over the price of oil. The Saudis
Hmm.
ultimately win it and keep their control over the levers of motion on OPEC Plus. And two, critically, Joe Biden wins in the US and promises to make Saudi Arabia a pariah because of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's assassination of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey,
Right.
which in and of itself was not necessarily grounds for a full-on diplomatic incident with the US. The situation is rather complicated, but was made into, because of political pressures around all the parties and because of a political opportunity that was sensed in the US, I think, a calling card for the Democrats. What does that mean? Well, it means there's a lot of bad blood between Saudi Arabia and the United States for obvious reasons, because if you're calling your de facto head of state a pariah and a murderer, that's not going to engender good
Yeah, that's
relations.
not going down well.
And then suddenly the situation changes in Ukraine. What does the Ukraine war do? It does three things to the regional balance in the Middle East. One, it completely puts the resurrected Iran deal on hold. There was a desire amongst the Biden administration, because it had the same personnel as the Obama administration,
Mm-hmm.
as the term in Washington goes, personnel is policy, to resurrect the JCPOA, re-enter the Iran deal, and essentially pick up the work that had been left off when the Trump administration exited the deal. That doesn't happen because Russia goes to war with Ukraine, and in effect, NATO starts fighting a proxy war with it. And it's very hard to imagine how one, concludes a major diplomatic agreement with the help of Russia on one side when you're trying to kind of fight it in Ukraine on the other. Two, this modifies the Iranian negotiating position rather thoroughly, because now Iran, not with a nuclear weapon yet, but on the cusp of being able to acquire one, is now able to gain a significant amount of leverage over Russia, a situation it's never been in before.
Right.
Why does this matter? Briefly, nuclear weapons are really hard to make. You need to do a bunch of different things. You need to test them. You need to make them small enough to fit on a missile. You need to produce enough of them so that you can shoot them off enough missiles to threaten to blow up. Ideally, you don't want to use them your enemy. You also need to create a bunch of safeguards and mechanisms to make sure they're only used when you want them to be used. Otherwise, the deterrent effect doesn't actually work. These are all complicated and expensive. It's not that hard to make a nuke. It's hard to operationalize that whole capability. And Russia is very good at that because it's a great power that has modernized and maintained nuclear forces for a long time.